Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Azure Takeoff show. And we have our guest today, Tashwar. How are you, Tashwar?
I'm good, team. How are you?
I'm doing great. And basically, you are not a guest. We are
True.
the we are the ones who take this show forward as of now. But we are very excited to have a lot of people on this show and be a part of the Azure Takeoff show. And I'm excited about that. So, Tashwar, what are we looking at today?
Okay, so last time we actually talked about resources, how we could lock resources and stuff for like deleting them and all that. So I thought, like, okay, since we talked about resources, the very primary thing that a lot of people actually do when they create a resource afterwards is most likely creating a virtual machine. So
Yes.
today I actually wanted to talk about how do we actually create a virtual machine inside the resource group. So keeping it basic sort of thing, but we'll build on it. Don't worry about it. There's going to be a lot of stuff that we're going to build on this virtual machine later on. But at the very beginning, I wanted people to learn that once you have created the resource group, if you haven't seen it, go to the previous show and then create the resources and then be able to create a resource inside of it. And today is going to be a virtual machine.
That's great. I'm excited about it.
Cool. So let me share my screen and then we could get started. As you could see right here, I'm inside the Azure portal and I'm going to click on a virtual machine. So I'm going to click on create Azure virtual machine. There we go. So there we go. So here I will actually choose the resource group. Again, I'll choose our last one. Last time we created Azure Takeoff. And I'm going to name my virtual machine. It's going to be called Hatim VM. Okay? I love your name. So everything's going to be default. I'm just choosing East US for the region. And I'm going to choose a Windows 11 Pro machine. But there's also something called See All Images. So let's click on it and see what is there, sort of thing.
By the way, I name all my VMs as Hatim VM.
So I guess I will have to name mine too. So as you can see over here, Marketplace actually has a lot of VMs for you to choose from. There's even private products that you could choose. You could choose Windows 10, Windows Server, Ubuntu Server, Red Hat, Linux. There's all kinds of actually VMs that you could actually choose. And some of them actually has a cost associated to it. It will tell you that actually every time that you use it, it's going to cost you this much, sort of thing. So there's all kinds of VMs that you could choose from. But I'm going
So
to go back.
I see a SQL Server VM. So what does it include?
Right here. So let's see. So what it does is actually comes with Windows installed. Like for example, here you could see that. So Windows Server 2019 installed with SQL Server 2019 Enterprise. So you could
That's
choose
great.
those that it comes with a package.
Great. So you don't have to install it on top of it.
Exactly. So that you don't have to actually get a Windows machine running and then install SQL Server. So
Correct. Correct.
yeah.
That's
So
great.
there's one package. So but today we won't go through that. We're just going to create as a Windows 11. So let me just go back to my virtual machines and click on create and choose back the Azure Takeoff. Again, we're going to call it Hatim VM since we all love
We are
Hatim.
going to have a bunch of them.
So Windows 11 machine, and I'm just going to go with standard size. I'm just choosing an 8 GB machine. It's all going to be standard. And you can see that it causes you $89.70 per month. This is Canadian dollars though, just so you know. So there are other ones that you could choose to. There's all kinds of sizes, but I'm just going to choose this one for the time being. And here's a username. I'm going to use Hatim again, and I'm going to choose a password. But you could see there's actually some restrictions of the password too.
That password is too long. There's no restriction to say that.
That password is long because it requires at least a 12 character password. So I just
Yes.
made it into a phrase that I could remember of. It's not Hatim, just so you know. And then what I'm going to do is actually I'm going to allow the RDP port because I want to be able to log into the virtual machine afterwards. I'm going to confirm that I'm eligible for Windows License 10s with multiple tenants over here. And I'm going to click on next. Disk, I'm just going to choose the default for the time being. And if I wanted to create an extra disk, I could actually create an extra disk and attach to it too right now. But I'll just stick with it and I'll pick the default networking, default management. Again, everything is going to be monitoring. Again, everything's default. I'm not picking anything extra from here. Tags, you could name your tags if you want to. And then you could click review and create, basically. It'll tell you how much it would cost Canadian dollars per hour because my account is related to Canada. And it says validation price, and then you could click on create. So rather than waiting for the VMs to create, I actually already created one. So you could see here there's a Takeoff one. And here I could actually, it's already started and I could connect to it. So I'm going to click to
Great.
connect to it. Again, everything is the same. It has a public IP address, so it would actually have it. And when I click on RDP, it shows me all of this information. Here's the IP address, here's the port, and I could download the RDB file. So let it download. And I'm going to double click on it. Okay.
So that is good that it also shows you over here that the port 3389 is enabled for you to do the RDP connection, as well
Mhm.
as it has a public IP address for us to connect that VM.
Exactly. So let me just see. So as you could see, it's trying to log me in right now. So we're in. I'm just going to click next to our Windows 11 machine. Accept.
Accept.
There we go. So we have our
Great.
Windows 11 machine right here. I'm just going to create a right click and say create a. There we go. The menus are there. And more options. New folder. And we're going to call it Heti. There we go. So we created a machine. So this is how we actually try to create a VM. But in the process, there's actually quite a few things that actually happens within our Azure, in our Azure account within the resources.
As you said, Tashwar, there are many other resources which are also created. So what are these resources?
So, okay, great question, actually, team. So all the resources that are actually created, you could see it over here. So I've created a Windows desktop machine, and you could see that, okay, from here, the types of resources that are created is the Takeoff virtual machine. There's a network interface that is being created. There's a virtual network. There's a public IP address, because everything in Azure is actually a resource, right? So everything
Yes.
actually gets created and you could modify it. So there's a public address resource and then a network security group resource too. All of these groups, all of these things are actually created. So for example, we could click on the network security group and we could look at like what are the virtual network connected to. All of those stuffs are in there. So every single thing that you actually create within a virtual machine is actually listed into these virtual machine basically. So when you create a VM sort of thing, you're thinking a Hyper-V sort of thing, a hypervisor creating a virtual machine, but inside of it, there's actually all these stuff that goes on to connect you to the network and all that other stuff too. So,
I think if we can go back to the resource group
hmm?
of our Azure Takeoff show, I wanted to see what all other resources it created.
So
We'll repeat
now
again.
that you're inside the resource group, Azure Takeoff resource group, you'll see that. See, like there's the virtual machine, there's the public IP address, there's the network security group, there's the VNet virtual network, which we'll talk about it in the future episode, how to actually create these virtual network. There's also a network interface where a virtual machine needs a network interface to talk to the public internet. And there's also a disk because you need a disk with a virtual machine. So
Yes,
all of these things are created individually, so you can modify them too if you want to.
that's great. And this public IP address, if I'm not wrong, it's attached to the VM directly. So
Correct.
if you want to access it through this, like if you are hosting an application or anything on the virtual machine, we should be able to access it from this IP address.
Correct. Correct. Now, the other thing is usually it's not best practice to directly access a VM too. So usually you
Okay.
would put a firewall or a load balancer of some sort because you might be running a virtual machine that, let's say you're running a web server, you might have two web server that's running and you want to load balance them sort of thing. So usually you don't tend to directly access it. And there are other
Okay.
ways to do it too. You could actually use the Bastion host to actually
Yeah.
connect to it and then jump over to
To
the
the VM.
VM. So some people call bastion host. Some people like to call it jump box. So because you
Okay.
jump from one box to the other box. So there's different views. We'll show about bastion host in a future episode. But I also wanted to mention one other thing is basically if you go back to the resources, this is a virtual machine. So I wanted to jump back to the virtual machine anyways. So here, Atim, you might be
Yes.
wondering, as in, like, I created a virtual machine. Now, I might not be using this virtual machine after a certain period of time. Let's say every
Correct.
night I want it to be shut down. How do I do this? Actually, there's a really nice thing over here in operations called auto shutdown. So if you
Wow.
click on auto
Amazing.
shutdown, you could actually say that at 7 p.m., at which time zone that you want, and automatically shut it down and then send me a notification about the shutdown. And I want it to my email basically. So I could say Tazwar team, team at gmail.com. I don't know if a team at gmail.com exists
No,
or not.
that I couldn't get that.
You couldn't get that? Okay. Actually, I have a Tazwar at gmail.com, just so you know.
That's
That's
right.
fine. So you could actually have it to hook, or you could hook it to a URL too, a webhook,
Okay.
so that it actually
Yeah.
maybe tells you on your Slack channel that the machine is shut down, or all kinds of stuff that you could do. So you could actually set this up, enable this, and say every night, let's say I work on the VM, I have Visual Studio on it, and I work on some stuff, and I need it to shut down because I don't want to be paying for it. Because it's only like I work only 8 hours, and by 9 p.m.
Yes.
it should be shut down. I'm not been doing anything with it, or even 5 p.m. if you want to, and then it would actually automatically shut down, and then you could actually restart it every morning when you come back. So everything would
Okay.
be staying at the state it is.
That's great. That's great, actually.
Great. So I
Cool.
think that's pretty much it. But next time we're going to be talking about like maybe backup of the virtual machine. How do we
Yes.
actually back this virtual machine up? What can we potentially use? Even networking. How can we structure it into a network that we could actually use virtual machines and not just a desktop machine, but maybe a
Yeah.
Linux machine and all that? How do we log into a Linux machine? That would be good to share too.
Agree. 100%. So for till that time, thank you everyone for joining us, and I hope you like the episode. Please go ahead and share, subscribe to our channel, and let us know in the comments if you want to know more about Azure. Thank you for having us. Thank you, Dashwar. It was really informative. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank
Bye
you,
bye.
team. Bye.